We're on the edge of the 76 FIM Motorcycling Grand Prix World Championship, the 75th year of MotoGP, as our shiny new passes remind us. And on this Paddock Pass podcast, we'll be chatting over the 5 narratives to emerge from the second and final test in Qatar, as well as the pre-season generally. We've also got a comprehensive interview with Chris Hillard from Alpinestars about some of the history and the whys and wherefores of airbag technology. As ever, I'm Adam Wheeler, and joined as usual by the searing font of knowledge and wisdom that is David Emmett. It would be lovely if all those smarts were for anything actually useful. And of course, Neil Morrison, the tallest journalist in MotoGP, but a man who can still do back-to-back flyaway Grand Prix with only hand luggage. Dave, after all that's happened, are you thinking of maybe swapping your BMW GS for a Multistrada or something from Ducati's portfolio?
I tell you, when I was looking at the GS, I was actually looking at the Multistrada as well. But the thing is, it's got a chain, and I'm just too lazy for chains. And also, I think the fuel economy is a little bit lower. But I keep reading reviews of them. They're lovely bikes. They are great. They've caught up the BMW just like they've caught up pretty much everything else. I would just like to say that Neil is now only the tallest journalist in MotoGP because our friend Gunter Wiesinger has decided to retire. But otherwise, it would have been a closer on thing. Unless Neil is now really offended because he thinks that he's taller than Gunter.
Yeah, I had a few centimeters on him.
Woo!
Yeah, poor Neil. He's not going to have any more eye-level conversations in the MotoGP paddock. He's always going to be looking down on someone. So there we go. Figuratively and literally, of course.
Yeah, no, exactly. No change there.
Neil, how serious is the Alpinestars MotoGP Fantasy League competition going to be between you and Steve this year? I'm curious to know. And has there actually been any money laid on the table between the Irishmen?
Well, now that it's called the Alpinestars Paddock Podcast Fantasy League, I'm going to be taking it more seriously than ever because it's been given a level of prestige that I don't think it had before. So yeah, you can bet your bottom dollar that money has been put on the table between Steve and I, and possibly even more between you guys, because I see some easy competition ahead of me.
Goodness, Dave, he might be opening that dusty wallet for once. We get a chance to actually take some money from him. I'm back on the subject of the BMWs, actually. I mean, if Toprak keeps looking in fast form in Phillip Island, that could be very promising for the Germans. I mean, that's some long overdue, race success coming from that, that project in that particular series. So, it'd be good to see if, that bike can make inroads into World Superbike result sheets. As I've just got back from Qatar, only 2 weeks before flying back there again. And the Lusail International Circuit still impresses me, both in terms of the scope and also sort of the flamboyance of the project. Just to quickly summarize the 2-day test for everybody, the world champion topped the time screens again. Around 10 riders were under Luca Marini's 2023 lap record set last November when Qatar hosted the penultimate round of the championship instead of its usual role as the opener. Almost everyone was under the fastest lap of 2023, which was set by Nea Bastianini. So speeds have seriously increased, and the fad for flipping lap records has carried over from Sepang. Promising signs also for Aprilia and KTM as they try to take the fight to Ducati. We'll get into this and more, but first, our friends at Renthal have a plethora of tried and race-tested accessories for your street bike. As we like to remind you, the company are not just masters of off-road parts and upgrades. Have a quick look, even out of curiosity, at renthal.com for bars, chains, grips, levers, and even more. A reminder also that if you like the podcast, then why not become a Paddock Insider by joining us on Patreon? For a small fee each month, you'll get loads of more content. In particular, our Paddock Notes shows, which are quick daily roundups from each and every day at a MotoGP event. Steve English, as we've just said, is currently in Australia readying for the launch of World Superbike, and both him and Gordon Ritchie have put together our first ever print special that features loads of preview content for the 2024 series. It's especially made for Patreon, and we hope it will catch on, and we can crank out a few more versions for MotoGP and maybe even some MXGP or SMX material this year. Have a read, have a listen on Patreon, and let us know what you think. Right, listen, that's enough from me. Let's get into the top sort of 5 topics or storylines that emerged from the Qatar test. The first one I'm going to throw at you. Dave, your thoughts first. Is it hard to remember a more convincing preseason favourite than Pecco Bagnaia?
Yeah, I mean, I was going back and looking at what Marc Marquez did in the past. I was remembering 2014 and sort of the start of the 2014 season when he won 10 in a row. But even then, Mark managed to break, I think, his either an arm or a leg before in a training accident. So missed one of the tests. He was, Sepang 1, he was incredibly fast. He didn't look like he was going to be this dominant. It's going to 2019, and it was Ducatis all over the place. It was really the Ducatis who looked strongest, and it wasn't until sort of Mark got going that we actually got to the season that Marquez actually started taking control. So no, I mean this is. It's very reminiscent of. Well, it's not reminiscent of anything. I mean, it's sort of reminiscent of the old days when if you weren't on a factory Honda or a factory Yamaha, you didn't stand a chance. The Ducatis were looking very good, and Ea Bastianini looking very good. But Pecco Bagnaia is just exuding absolute calm, serenity, and confidence, really. So he's just looking unstoppable.
Neil, 2-lap records, bike modifications. He said that it's complete. There's no more work to be done. He didn't have any kind of issues, nothing major in terms of the technical side. He's fully fit. He has a half a decade now on GP machinery from Bologna, and he must be on the verge of confirming what would assume would be a multi-year contract with the factory. It's hard to imagine how things could look any better for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the fact that he's not just won a second championship, that's obviously a very difficult thing to do. I think the manner in which he won it, the fact that he beat someone who was on the same bike as him in conditions which were kind of against him, really, when we think about what it was like with about 4 or 5 races to go. I think that sort of event just gives you like such a massive level of confidence boost. It does help that it looks as though the Ducati GP24 has taken a step forward on the 23 machine. And Pecco's just, he's part of the furniture there. Like he is just, he's kind of tailor-made for that factory Ducati team. It's not just that he's beaten a couple of lap records I think it's the fact that he demolished the lap record in Sepang by 0.8 of a second, was over 0.8 of a second faster on the final day in Qatar than the previous lap record as well. It's not just like he's going faster, he's going massive amounts faster, and it bodes well. But I would say that he's my favourite going into this year, but I don't think we're looking at a guy that's going to be clearing off and winning every race by an absolute stretch. I do think he's going to have quite a lot of competition. I don't think it's going to be easy this year for him, and I don't think any watching fans should be a little put off by the fact that Pecco and Ducati have dominated preseason. I think that I don't think personally that's an indicator that he's going to win the first 10 races, for example.
Yeah, Pecco was saying that what he felt that the bike it had the best of the GP22 and the best parts of the GP23 sort of combined, which made it better. And the only comment that I really have is that it's all very well us talking up Pecco Bagnaia, and it's absolutely the rational thing to do because he has looked so confident. But as Nicky Hayden said, this is why you go racing. This is why you line up on Sunday. You never know what's going to happen. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So let's see what happens. It isn't a foregone conclusion. Things will happen. We don't know what will happen. But you would have to think, looking at what's happened so far, that over the course of a season, Pecco Bagnaia is sitting in a very, very comfortable place indeed.
Yeah, and Bagnaia, I think, cited the mistakes and errors he made last year, Dave. For example, if we look at Qatar in Texas, if we look at Le Mans, that was a situation that, he couldn't really avoid with Maverick Vinales. And those are racing incidents, like you say. It means the championship's not always going to be a given thing, unless you're Max Verstappen in Formula One and just taking part in a ball fest. But, I think Bagnaia's, people will look at the speed in Sepang and try to find almost reasons or excuses for it. How was the track conditions? How was the surface? What's going on? I think Michelin were also asking more riders to test the new 25 front. I think Jack Miller was one of the riders that experimented with it in Qatar. And of course, the new aero package that Ducati have brought, there are little incremental gains that have been made. But I think it's just a case of the Bagnaia Ducati package maturing. And, maybe finally beating Jorge Martin last year was a big boost to his confidence. You can imagine if Marc Marquez doesn't produce any outstanding results for the first half of the season, then Bagnaia's momentum's just going to fly.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's going to be key. If Mark comes out and really gives him a good race in Qatar, or even in Portimao at the second round, I think that's going to be a big thing that works in Mark's favour, that he's so close so early on. I think Pecco kind of knows that he needs to come out swinging. He needs to basically assert his authority. It sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but he does, in some respects, need to assert his authority over the rest of the Ducati riders, just to remind everyone that he's number one, because although he has it on his bike, many would argue that Jorge Martin was faster than him last year. And of course, Mark is coming across to the Gresini team this year. And it was quite interesting that he was pretty much talking up the 24 package, saying it's the best thing he's ever ridden. And he's feeling as confident as he ever has done. While I think it was Enea Bastianini and Jorge Martin, the other guys on the GP24, obviously Franco Morbidelli was missing again from the Qatar test due to recovery from concussion. Those guys were talking about some rear cheddar issues, which were kind of upsetting them. Now, it didn't look like it really upset Bastianini too much if you look at the time sheets. But he was saying that during his longer, I think it was a sprint simulation on Tuesday evening, that he was finding this sprint simulation looked really, really fast from what I could see. In fact, the fastest of anyone that did a full distance sprint simulation. But Martin was saying that he basically had to abandon his simulation because of this chatter issue that he was having on the rear of the bike. So I'm not sure if that's a consequence of the new fairing they've got and that they're running this year. Just a few teething issues that haven't quite got their setup absolutely on point. But yeah, it definitely seemed like for Martin that his enthusiasm was dimmed just a little bit by the end of the day, because I think preseason up until that moment had been going almost perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which I find most remarkable about both tests really is, as you said, Ad, the times have just been astonishing. They've been so much faster. But it's not just down to the bikes. It's not just that this year's bikes are so much faster than last year's bikes. Because if you look at if you look at who is fast, Marc Marquez was fourth quickest, and he's on last year's bike. Raul Fernandez is on last year's bike. He was fifth fastest. Fabio Di Gianantonio and Marco Bezzecchi, 8th and 10th on last year's bike. So there's definitely something going on, and I'm actually quite intrigued to find out, or to try to figure out what it might be. Why is everyone so much faster? Is it just the track is sort of coming in? Because Qatar has been resurfaced. Tracks sort of they improve with the age a little bit. Once they first start, they need to be sort of like rubbered in. They need to get sort of get cleaned up, have the sharp edges taken off of them, and then they get faster, and then they decline slowly. So maybe the both Sepang, because Sepang also had sizable sections of it resurfaced. Maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe Michelin have found something with the tyre, just a slightly better match. Obviously, we've got a better front tyre that will also make a difference. Maybe people are just getting better and having to find more in themselves as the bikes get closer. But that to me, I find that quite a fascinating question. Why is this happening?
I also wonder what kind of track state we'll find when we go back for the Grand Prix. I mean, of course, you have to add Moto2 and Moto3 and all that Pirelli rubber. But then it was quite unusual to arrive in Parking 1 on Monday in the Lusail International Circuit. And the first thing we saw was a load of kind of supercars because... and the teams were complaining about this to a degree, because everybody has to pack up the stuff and lock it away due to the World Endurance Championship having a round at the Lusail International Circuit before the Grand Prix. So otherwise, the MotoGP teams would have left everything in the pit boxes already set up, and then they would have saved at least half a day's work in returning for the Grand Prix. But this time they had to clear everything off ready for the cars. And that means, I don't know if this event in Qatar is a 12-hour or 24-hour or what happens, but you'd imagine that they're going to be cleaning up the track considerably. And it was still shocking for me when I had a walk around both on Monday and Tuesday to see when riders went off the line, how much crap and roost was being sprayed up, away from the main sort of racing trajectory. I think Jack Miller was saying that he was following Brett Binder for a section, and when Binder sort of moved aside, went off the line, he was throwing up all sorts of crap around his neck and was bouncing off his visor. So he kind of made a welcome back to Qatar sort of gesture. But there we go. Listen, point number 2. Based solely on Sepang and Qatar, which I know is largely pointless when we're trying to forecast things for this season, who's going to be the surprise package of this year? Neil?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure if you could call this guy a surprise package because he had such a strong end of 2023. But I think Fabio Di Giannantonio, his performances at both Sepang and in Qatar have kind of suggested that he's maybe in a perfect place to perform like what Marco Bezzecchi did last year. And that's, win a couple of races, be a consistent threat, maybe be somewhere in the running for the top 3 in the championship, maybe even challenging the best guys in the championship. I don't know. I think that's maybe a bit far-fetched, but certainly outside the kind of the big names that we're expecting to fight at the front, Bagnaia, Bastianini, Martin, Marc Marquez, and maybe Brad Binder, or maybe one of the Aprilias. I think Digia has shown, especially on his longer runs, in both Sepang and in Qatar, that he is going to continue on basically where he left off at the end of last year. And where he left off at the end of last year was basically the third fastest guy. If you take the points scored from the Japanese Grand Prix onwards in the final 7 GPs, Digia was the third highest scoring rider behind Bagnaia and Martin. And I just liked his comments yesterday, how kind of mature he is. He said he kind of went for a time attack, didn't quite get his strategy right, didn't go for a time attack at the absolute perfect time of the day, but said, it doesn't really matter. He was more focused on doing his longer run, his simulation at the end of the day. And his times in that were very, very competitive indeed. I said earlier that Bastianini looked like he was maybe the fastest guy over a distance along with Aleix Espargaro, but Digia wasn't far away either. So, I would go for the number 49.
Neil, it's heartwarming to see what a Digia fanboy you've become. All that cynicism of last year, it's just been washed away by, this positive glow of admiration. I agree with you. And I think, is it fair to say that Digia's benchmark or reference has to be the speed or results of Luca Marini? I mean, he has to be aiming for that kind of perennial top 5 sort of presence, right? I mean, just to prove to VR46 that he was the right man to hire.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good aim for him to go into the season with. But I honestly think that he'll probably be even higher than that. As I said, I think what Bezzecchi did last year. I think I'm not saying that he can be as high as third in the championship, but I certainly expect him to maybe win a couple of races and be a podium threat at a couple of rounds. So yeah, Marquez aside, I think Digia is the other guy on the GP23s, although Bezzecchi was also looking a lot stronger in Qatar than he was in Malaysia. But yeah, I like the way Digia is going about his business, and the fact that he's just kind of fitted perfectly into that team, despite not really ever being a VR46 Academy member. I think it bodes very well for his season.
I'm going to take this question on a slightly different way, because I was looking at, when you asked this in the group chat, I had a sort of think about it, and I had a look at some of the timesheets and all the rest of it, and you look down the list of names, and there aren't any bad riders anymore. All of them can win races, so it's difficult to say who's going to impress, because there's nobody who's really going to, no one who's really going to sort of surprise by being successful. So I'm going to come at it from the opposite end. I think my surprise is going to be how poorly Maverick Vinales is going to do this year. He has struggled in the test. He can't really get the bike to stop. It's not really responding the way that he wants. He didn't like it in Sepang. He liked it a little better in Qatar. And I think he's going to be in for a really tough year, and especially once we get to, shall we say, Jerez, when once you start to get the first sort of chat about contracts and the future and all the rest of it, I think that's the point where some riders are going to start getting nervous. And we know that Maverick is incredibly talented, just incredibly fast. On his day, the fastest guy on the grid. But he's also really easy to upset. He's really easy to get distracted, to lose it, to go sort of for everything to go sideways for him. And I think that my guess is that this is going to be a bad season for Maverick Vinales. So congratulations to Maverick Vinales, your 2024 MotoGP champion.
Yeah, exactly, because he hasn't topped any preseason test either. Well, he did actually top Valencia. We should give him that. But yeah, Sepang and Qatar has been very poor by his normal, exceptional testing standards. Just something to add there, Dave. I thought it was quite interesting that Massimo Rivola, the CEO of Aprilia Racing, after the Aprilia launch just ahead of the Qatar test, was talking about Maverick. He wants to see him kick on from where he left off at Valencia, which was pole position, and in play for basically a victory or maybe a podium. And he was like, yeah, I expect Maverick to be up there winning pretty much straight away. And that's quite a lot of pressure to put on your rider's shoulders. And I'm not sure if he was meaning that as a bit of a, kick up the backside, or just trying to instill some proper confidence in a rider that's not been feeling at his most comfortable. But yeah, those are pretty high expectations. And we know Aprilia have not been putting lots of pressure on Maverick up until now. But this is the time to deliver.
I know we kind of tackled this a little bit on the last podcast, but I think we are going to get some surprises from Pedro Acosta. Just watching the amount of laps, watching trackside as well, the way that he was attacking some of the corners. I mean, he looks like he's already had a season on a MotoGP bike. He was talking as well at the end of play on Tuesday, just saying how he was really getting to grips with all the intricacies of riding the bike, with the electronics, the levers, the settings, the buttons, everything. That's something that Marc Marquez is still trying to adjust to on the Ducati after 11 years on a Honda. So I think Acosta has had pretty much a perfect preseason in showing that he can adapt quickly, he can learn quickly. The hype is there, but it's not, crazy as if he was second, third, fourth fastest. And, he's using the other KTM riders like Jack Miller and Brad Binder, and of course his teammate, as sort of markers. And I think he's already doing a pretty good job of getting close. Aside from that, and this sort of leads on to point 3 from Qatar, I quite like the look of Raul Fernandez. I mean, he's using last year's Aprilia, which we know had its flaws at certain circuits, but then, Neil, don't shake your head at me on the video. He's using a bike that, is proven in some aspects and some circuits, and he's nursing 3 fractures. He said he's touch and go whether he's going to be 100% fit for the first Grand Prix, and he was able to be quick when he wanted to. Race simulations or whatever else, question marks remain. But anyway, like I said, that leads on to the third point, and my question to you both, I don't know who wants to tackle it first.
You can't just throw in Raul Fernandez. Yeah, you can't just throw in Raul Fernandez. He's coming back. Point 3 is, can we trust Aprilia to have made a forward step? So there you go. Now you can go on to
insist on interjecting here. But who was fastest on the Friday at Qatar last year when nothing really mattered? Raul Fernandez. And where did he finish in the race? Anyone?
17th.
Yeah.
17th.
How many excuses do you want, Neil? He's young, he's got another year of experience, and has people that believe in him. He desperately
needs a contract. He really has to do something. He has to show something. He has to show something early in the season. So he's pushing himself. I actually think there is a bit of a paradox. Riders will injure themselves and they'll come back and they'll actually be much faster than previously while they're still injured, because they're riding much more carefully, much more cautiously, less they're taking more considered risk. Ralph Fernandez was saying, "Look, I can't afford to hurt myself, so I was being careful not to crash." And I think that's one reason for being. He is actually riding better. I think injured riders can ride better when they're injured, because they're having to think about it. And I think that's what's going on with Ralph Fernandez. And I expect to be not surprised by Ralph Fernandez at all when he finishes sort of 21st in the championship.
Well, let's hold on. This is not quite the predictions and preview show just yet. But listen, the point about Aprilia, I think, is very valid because Aleix Espargaro looked incredibly strong. He was also very happy with what he had in the RSGP 24. Maverick Viñales, as we've discussed, is somewhat of an enigma. Miguel Oliveira was struggling on the new bike. Trackhouse have that fresh machinery, but he just couldn't get it to work in the faster turns. And then, of course, you have Ralph Fernandez, who could be this outlier. I mean, I think the question over how competitive Aprilia can be and whether they've really rectified any of those flaws from last year is a very valid one.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it does look like the Aprilia, the 2024 Aprilia is a better all-round package. It does look more competitive. They've still got things to do. The one thing which Aleix Espargaro was complaining about was torque, about acceleration. He just feels that they can't accelerate the way that he wants to accelerate. But the rest of the bike, he was pretty impressed by. He was very happy with it, and his pace was good. His single lap pace was good. He's looking very confident, and he's sounding very relaxed and calm as well. Now, once we go racing, things tend to change. So we shall have to see. But again, I think much more important or significant in terms of Aprilia's results will be how well organized they manage to be, because Aprilia have form for tripping themselves up and making things very difficult for themselves. They're still going to have this issue with engine heat. They're still going to have this issue with what happens when we get to the flyaways and they suddenly find out that they haven't bought enough parts, or they bought too many parts, or they haven't got the right parts. They're prone to making these kind of mistakes, which I think that's just experience. Doing it again and again and again, season after season. There's room to grow there, but I think that they do this. Aleix Espargaro, was it at Motegi, and not last year, but the year before, where they forgot to take the fuel map off? That kind of mistake just typifies Aprilia. I think that is the biggest risk. I think the bike is great. I think the biggest risk for Aprilia is organizational.
Yeah, I think that you definitely see that Aleix was a big fan of the bike during all of the preseason. I think he was saying comments to the tune of this is the best bike he's ever ridden, the most competitive bike he's ever ridden, and he was complaining about the time attack capabilities of the RSGP, but he finished third overall. So I think he was expecting it to be a massive jump from the times he was posting during his race simulation to what he did, and it wasn't quite as big as he had hoped, but it was still very, very competitive. It looks as though this new aero package that they're running with lots of downforce gives him tremendous stability, more stability than ever. As Dave said, there's still a few issues where they're not quite as competitive as Ducati exit and turns with their acceleration. But overall, it's definitely pretty positive. So, Aleix was saying things to the effect of this is the most excited I've ever been going into a season, and I'm not sure I would fall short from calling Aleix like a title contender, but I do think he's on course to potentially replicate what he's been doing over the past couple of seasons, which is occasional victor, occasional challenger for victories. But yeah, I would stop short of saying that they're going to be fighting for the championship.
Typically well-grounded and rounded judgment there, Neil. Couldn't have voiced it any better. I think you got it spot on. But listen, we've talked about Maverick Vinales and Raul Fernandez, and the Spaniards are two riders that benefit from Alpinestars' Tech Air airbag technology. In an effort to explain how and why the protection has surfaced in MotoGP and has been mandatory for 6 years, we went straight to the firm to ask media manager Chris Hillard. And here's a special feature interview with him and about the story of the airbag. Chris, thanks for agreeing to talk to us about Alpinestars' story of airbags. It's something we wanted to bring up a couple of times here on the podcast, and the company in particular have a rich history in terms of bringing the product to MotoGP. I think it's 5 years now. It's 5 seasons that it's been mandatory in the MotoGP class. Tell us a little bit about how essentially what was a boot manufacturer. Alpinestars has a huge presence now in motorcycle racing, but how did the story with airbags and that whole strand of technology start? Because it must have been quite a big pivot for the company to invest in that direction.
Absolutely. I mean, here we are, 2024, beginning of, and it was 2018 when airbags became mandatory across all the classes, but as a department, I guess Tech Air started back in about 2001, 2002, if you can believe it. And, and back then it wasn't sort of the department it is now, that's for sure. Back then it was kind of like a sort of special projects, just a couple of people involved in it. And even then the information about what we're developing wasn't readily known to everybody. It was kind of privileged information, and what we were doing. I think the department started in about 2001, but in 2003 is when we really started ramping up data logging. And at the time, I guess unless you were directly on the project, us that were at racing just knew we were logging data to understand riding behavior, and we didn't necessarily know that it was leading towards an airbag. It was a very privileged information project. And that was just a major part of the beginnings of it, was all that data logging we were doing.
I mean, you talk about a privileged sort of project. I mean, just from the product development you've got going on now, do you reckon it was quite difficult to sort of keep that sort of stuff a secret back then?
Back then, it's easy to think about it now in 2024. But back in the early 2000s, the idea of an airbag for motorcycle racing, especially like an autonomous one that was electronically controlled with, GPSs and sensors, was quite an alien concept. And so what it took, I think, at that time was, some visionary foresight really to look at that type of project and commit to it, and commit to making it happen, which, a few people knew about it. But even, I think, the riders, when we were first data logging, didn't know it was going to be for an eventual airbag. We were just sort of trying to understand riding behavior from a data level.
So it was a case of sticking some wires in a hump and say, guys, we're just recording what's going on.
The early data logging system we were putting, I think there was about 90 sensors inside the suits or so. It was just like a whole maze of cables and everything there. I think there's still some photos that we've got on the file of John Hopkins looking like a tad uncomfortable. But, he was a great example of somebody that was, really open to the data logging and to the project. And it always starts with people that are willing to sort of get involved in it and have the trust that, we're doing something that'll be worthwhile in the future. We've always had a pretty big race program. And so, there's always athletes within that we can rely upon for that type of assistance. Even if they don't know what the end goal is, they know that it's going to help towards something.
I can't help but feel, as we're sitting here at the Qatar test, bikes going around in the background behind us, that there's probably some Alpinestars suits on track now with some magical sensors in it producing stuff for the future. But I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I mean, it's, you guys use your development in racing almost as like a part of the marketing campaign. You really use the top guys and the hours they're putting in, the skills they're putting in to develop this stuff. I mean, when the airbag was first coming, to prototype stages, were you able to use MotoGP guys, or was there a lot of skepticism about, taking this kind of technology on board with them when they're racing?
We've always, I think Alpinestars, we've shown, and even just in recent times as well, that, we always like to sort of launch these projects and launch this development with the best athletes that we can in the world. You know, with the SR10 helmet that we launched on track last year, the first ever competitive race for that was with MotoGP riders, and it was the strategy with the airbags back in the sort of late 2000s when we had the final system, well, not final system, but like a track-ready system that was in MotoGP, first at testing, and then we were able to implement it at races, I think during the 2009 season. We had it on track at MotoGP weekends. And it's just always been the strategy of Alpinestars, as much as, you know, it can be quite daunting because what you're looking at there is proving a concept, but with all the eyes of the world on it. So it's quite intensive, but at the same time and time again, it's always been of great value in order to get that level of feedback and input about it.
I mean, you've worked around athletes for decades now. They are sort of creatures of habit, really. They don't like to change, particularly if things are going well in their sporting careers. So was there any kind of riders that were hesitant to using an airbag, or maybe had a little bit of I don't know, just a reluctance to maybe embrace the technology?
I think, yeah, that's a. I mean, again, part of like having like a big race program is that we work very closely with each of our athletes to sort of understand what they're looking for, what their goals are, how we can help, and also how we can, you know, just make them as comfortable as possible. So in the early stages of development for this, it wasn't for everybody. And if I think back to when the project launched, and in fact, like last week, I was driving from like Death Valley back to Vegas with Keith Dowdle, who's at Cycle News and was at American Honda for years and years and years, and we were talking about Nicky Hayden from 2006 to 2007. Like 2006, he won the MotoGP championship, but then the 2007 bike was significantly smaller. And the incredible thing was we both saw Nicky in January of 2007 when he spent an off season trying to get as lean as possible. And, you know, you're talking about the MotoGP champion who was in amazing shape, trained by Alden Baker. You know, he was in incredible shape, but we were both shocked when we saw him in January around Anaheim 1 Supercross that he'd managed to lose about 10 kilos or so, or, you know, something close to that. He was almost unrecognizable as the guy that won the championship 2-3 months before. And I say that to say that in that moment in time, that was the absolute priority of Nicky, was, you know, putting himself through that to try and be as light as possible. So, you know, introducing an airbag to him in that period where he's just going to see the weight of that. And therefore it's not, you know, something that, yes, we want to make it available to him. But at the same time, you know, we figured he'd come to the project sooner or later. And so we would never put people under too much undue pressure for it. On the flip side, around that time, you know, we had Danny Pedrosa on the program, we had Mika Kallio on the program, who weight wasn't such a critical thing for them. And actually, in the case of Danny especially, protection was something that, you know, he was really motivated by. So, you know, in those riders, we had really willing participants to try and take the project forward.
I mean, you mentioned Danny and Mika, but was there another rider that was, you know, fully on board from the first moment, like, bring this on, you know, I think it's fantastic, I want to help develop it? I mean, was there somebody with that completely open attitude that helped things along?
I think, yeah, through the years, yeah, I feel like when it comes to safety and protection products, Danny Pedrosa has been, you know, very instrumental. It's why he came to Alpinestars. It's projects that he wanted to work on. And so he was always very willing on it. Then there's riders like Carlos Checa, you know, who was about the first guy to ever wear our leather suit, for example. And he always took a real vested interest in technology and developments. But airbags, especially back then, were almost seen as witchcraft, and you know, and it's crazy to think where they were then, because, like, let's say the catalyst for the project was the amount of collarbone injuries that were happening in the sport in the early, mid, late 2000s. That, not the worst injury you can get, but you're going to miss the next race, and it could really derail a season. And so the initial systems that we introduced, they covered the shoulder and the collarbone. So the electronics were quite big and quite heavy, and then the airbag coverage itself, when you compare it to present day now, was actually very small, but it covered a key area being the shoulder and collarbone. And so, as the years have progressed with it and coverage has increased, I think you could probably speak to this, that, back then, whenever there was a crash with any rider, journalists, media would always come to us like, did the airbag deploy? They were really sort of fascinated by the concept of it. And because it wasn't as big as it is now, where you can really visibly see the airbag has gone off, there was questions about it. And so, again, navigating all of that during a development process in the most viewed championship in the world was intensive, but for the greater good, I think it worked out really well.
I mean, if I think of some Alpinestars products, the motocross boots are fantastic sort of feats of engineering, but then the airbag just took things to another level. And now, of course, you guys have helmet protection as well, or head protection, I should say. But, was it a case with the airbag in the beginning where the technology was incredibly advanced, but you guys almost had to wait a little bit for hardware and software to sort of catch up?
Yeah, I think in the early stages of it, being an apparel company, and then all of a sudden we're an electronics company. I say all of a sudden, it was definitely a process. When we look at our tech air department now in 2024, everything that's in that system, the electronics, the algorithm, the hardware, everything about it is designed by us, developed by us, produced by us, and assembled by us. And so that's a major part of the achievement, is through the years of it, once we proved the concept and once we wanted to move forward with it, to just bring every element of it in-house rather than using external suppliers for different elements of it. And so that was a major sort of step in development, alongside increasing the coverage of the airbag, decreasing the deployment times, and really, as with anything electronic, it's always got to get faster, lighter, better, stronger. And that's been the case through the years as well. And it hasn't slowed down a jot since 2018 and the technology becoming mandatory. In fact, we've increased our airbag coverage since then, to the point where now, the guys in MotoGP, they have airbag coverage for their shoulders, their ribs, their full back, and also their hips as well, which is an incredible amount of coverage.
Were there any kind of obstacles early on in development that you had to overcome? I mean, was maybe the inflation time the biggest kind of issue? I mean, it had to work reliably, and it had to work quickly, really, to protect these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it all came from, building the algorithm and getting all of that data. And so that's probably what took a lot of years, was to be able to build an algorithm that could, operate at the level that it needed to. When you think about it as well, like these guys, a high side's probably the easiest crash to protect for with an airbag, because you do have some airtime, you do have some moments. But actually, the fact that they can deploy before a shoulder hits the ground on a low side, considering they corner it between like 52 and 58 degrees lean angle, is a huge achievement on itself. And the software is so sophisticated now that it really can tell the difference between what's good cornering and what might be problematic.
For people that don't necessarily know so much about how it works or what it is, I mean, if we take Pecco Bagnaia's suit, for example, what kind of constitutes the airbag? I mean, we're looking at cylinders and able to discharge the actual protection itself. I mean, what kind of structure is there?
It's probably like three important bits of a airbag system. Like, one is the electronics, and by electronics I'm including like the gyroscope and the sensors and accelerometers in that, and that can be located inside the hump or in the back protector, let's say, of a system. Then there's the bag itself, basically. And And then on top of that, like where the real weight of an airbag system is in the argon gas canister. Basically, that deploys the air into the bag. This is it's an explosive device, effectively, and it has to have such an amount of compressed air in it that it has to fully inflate the bag within 25 milliseconds, basically.
I know you fired I wore an off-road one where you managed to fire at me. It was a very unpleasant experience just standing there, especially people watching. That was it's a very rigorous piece of kit. It's doing a very sort of functional job for the athletes that are using it. I can imagine, when you're flying through the air, just to have that thing firing is a real sense of sort of security. But just talking about progression of the technology, Chris, if you visualize the first kind of airbags in the suits, the first editions, first generations, around Nicky's time, around Danny's time when he first came into the Premier class, to now, are we just talking about size, or is there something on the materials themselves that's a lot more resistant, a lot better? What's the main difference?
Yeah, I think everything has incrementally improved since those days. When we introduced it to the track, it was groundbreaking, durable. Everything about it functioned really well. But if you can imagine, as the project has gone through the years, to this day, for example, every crash that happens in any class here in the GP paddock, in the Superbike paddock, or anywhere where there's airbag coverage, the data is downloaded, and there's a crash report made on every single crash that happens. And the data that comes from that, it goes into feeding the algorithm more. So as the years have gone by, what we've got with a comprehensive program around the world that we've got, and not just with like professional racers, but anybody that returns their airbag to us, be it from the street, be it from the track, we take that opportunity to download the data. And what it gives us is this incredible amount of information and understanding of crash dynamics.
It probably needs a new name, because technically it's not really a bag anymore, is it? With the comprehensive sort of coverage of the body that the Alpinestars unit provides, it's I don't know, it's massive, like you say.
Yeah. Like I said, the coverage of it and things like the system the GP riders use here, which is kind of very similar to the Tech Air 10 that you can buy in stores. It's an incredible amount of coverage, because, like I said, in 2009, we were just covering the shoulder and the collarbones. But the fact is, with that, in 2018, it was such an important step in airbag technology when the FIM had seen such a drastic reduction in collarbone injuries specifically, but also shoulder injuries and upper bodies injuries, that it just made perfect sense to make the technology mandatory. By that time, it had proven itself time and time again, and so that was just a major milestone in that development when it was recognized that way. And that's just in World Championship road racing, it was a very much shorter arc in Dakar Rally, for example, where we first had a system there, I think, in about 2018, 2019. But already by 2021, they made it mandatory at the Dakar Rally for everyone on a bike and quad to use the technology.
It replaced neck braces, I think, right? Neck braces, I think, were mandatory as well in the Dakar for a while, a year or two. But now, like you say, airbags are there as well. You have to imagine it's only a matter of time. I know you guys have been sort of gathering data in off-road and motocross, for almost 10 years now. So, off-road riding is much more complex or much more diverse in terms of the moments or the accidents you can have. So it must be a bigger field to sort of penetrate in that way. But, you mentioned sort of collecting data and the sensors and the gyroscopes and everything that you have. That amount of information, that must give you a lot of options as well. Not just for airbag stuff, but for other uses or protection in the suit. Obviously I don't want you to talk about products that you can't, but it must be liberating and useful to have all that stuff.
Yeah, as intellectual property that we own, it's really great. But first and foremost, Alpinestars is a sort of motorcycling. If it's got to have wheels, and then we're onto it. Be it like on-road, off-road, 4 wheels, downhill mountain biking. This is definitely our wheelhouse. So, as with the airbag systems that we've made for road motorcycling. to what we've done with Tech Air off-road and rally riding and enduro riding, with that system that's being released now to the public. And then on top of that, it's been no secret we've been developing a motocross system. We've been data logging downhill mountain bike World Cups as well. So, we're really sort of feeding our core of activities. And if you have this technology and if you have this, then we owe it to ourselves to really try and find a solution in each of the categories that we follow where it could be beneficial.
So, I mean, it's just over half a decade that it's been, prevalent in MotoGP airbag technology, but also in that same time frame, you guys have brought out versions for the public and for people to wear on the road. There's now, 3? How many different versions do you have for riders on the street?
There's, now as far as like a consumer product, let's say the family right now, there's Tech Air 3, there's Tech Air 5, there's Tech Air 10, and there's Tech Air Off-Road. And then before that was Tech Air Race and Street, with the first sort of integrated into the suit systems. And then we also have Tech Air 7X, which is basically the new Tech Air Race and a really universal product that can be used in conjunction with any Tech Air compatible system that'll come out next year as well. But the fact is, with it and with the project, from even just a few years ago where the question would have been along the lines of should I use an airbag, to now the question is, okay, which airbag suits my needs best? And from Tech Air 3, which is more of you can wear this jacket underneath or over a jacket. It's quite, easily foldable. It doesn't have a built-in back protector, for example, so it's quite packable. So we sort of...
Yeah, it's almost like a vest. It's quite impressive.
That's it. And like I said, it can be worn over the top of something, or it can be worn underneath. It's really quite easily usable, and we sort of gear that more towards like commuting or that daily motorcycle riding, just popping to the shops and throwing it on type of riding. Tech Air 5 is very versatile. Like it's a vest that wears underneath. On the app, you can have a track function or a street function. Tech Air 10 has the same things, but it's more geared towards like the ultimate in track day protection. And then Tech Air Off-Road has been developed at the Dakar Rally in the same way that we develop the other systems here at MotoGP. I mean,
that sort of diversity is fundamental, really, because I think for, a superbike rider or a track day rider, they don't mind the spend, in a race type system, like you say, integrated to a one-piece suit. That's just part of the kind of equipment that you need to do that activity. But then for somebody who's a casual rider or a commuter, somebody who's, on a T-Max going around the city, then to have like a lighter, smaller, more moderately priced airbag is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were trying to sort of have options for all type of rider, and then also make the technology available to, like it's also important for us to be able to make the technology available to those that aren't necessarily wearing an Alpinestars leather suit or a Alpinestars jacket. God knows why they wouldn't do that, but at the same time, it's important for us. Like it's a piece of equipment that we really believe in the safety of, and so we don't want to limit it just to people that wear our other products as well.
In your job, is it still a hard sell, getting people on board with the airbags? I mean, your experiences recently with the helmet, must have been much more straightforward because people traditionally know what they're getting. Okay, you're educating people about the technology inside the lid, but then the airbag, I think maybe people were still thinking, well, do I necessarily need that? And maybe it was a situation that's surrounding neck braces as well for a time.
Yeah, I think with airbags, probably the best, I guess what we've noticed through the years is that year on year we sell more systems. Year on year our dealers, distributors are buying more systems. So I feel like word of mouth is a really strong element to promoting airbag safety. So let's say there's a group of riders and one of the riders in that group has an airbag. You're more likely to sell more airbags off the back of people in the group doing that. So for us, it's been really important then to take these systems to events, to talk to people directly. It's not something that can be really explained well in like good video content or anything like that. You need to be where the riders are. So, our commitment to being at events like ABR Fest in the UK, for example. We were just at London Motorcycle Show with the helmet for, just last week with Jorge Martin, and other events like this where you can actually communicate with potential users. That seems to be really important when it comes to airbags.
There's a tough part as well been about giving people value for the buck, whether it's a case of resetting the system or giving more than one inflation, or the way that the airbag, deploys and then resets. I mean, I guess these are all things also for you guys to develop the project for the future.
I think one of the biggest selling points that we perhaps don't communicate enough is that, with our systems, when you buy a Alpinestars Tech Air system, that is your system, and you own it. It's not a subscription based model where you have to pay your subscription to continue using the technology. That's your system, and where you would need to service it is in the event of a crash and you need to change the canister or change the bag, which would happen after, I think, four inflations of the bag is when we recommend you change the actual bag itself. And with all these new iterations of the Tech Air systems that we're making, we have a really good network of our dealers and distributors having service centers in each territory. So you don't necessarily have to send the systems all the way back to us at HQ anymore. You can find a local outlet that can do it, and they're all trained by Alpinestars, and that was a good step forward. But then on top of that as well, with the new systems that we're developing, certainly when it came to the Tech Air off-road system, where we want to make it possible for the user to change cartridges themselves in quite an easy way, and so it doesn't have to be sent away every time you want to recharge it, basically.
I mean, for deployments is pretty good, really. I mean, if you come off a bike, you would expect to be ditching your crash helmet. You're going to be sort of resetting or replacing kit. Whereas, if the airbag's going to work up to 4 times, then that's pretty good value.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because we're a bit desensitized here at the MotoGP paddock, because it's been normalized that you might want to have a big crash, jump straight back on the bike, and then potentially crash again. That's why we offer 2 charges to each rider. It's not something that we enforce that riders have, because obviously the extra weight of 2 charges is something we offer, but it's up to the rider to really want to have that. Some do, some don't. But just the concept that you want to get back on the bike as quickly as possible and potentially be, protected for a second crash. It sounds normal to us because we're here, but the reality of that, generally you might sort of catch your breath a little bit if you crash on the street or do something there.
Chris, do you think it's fair to say Alpinestars can consider themselves pioneers in this field? I mean, the product that you guys offer and the coverage that you have on the MotoGP grid, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a company with such a forceful name when it comes to airbag technology.
Yeah, I think I honestly think we can, off the back of, and obviously we're not the only company that produces this technology, and it's been a space race through the year, but it's just been ultimately a really positive project all around, because what we've been doing, everybody that has a system is improving rider safety. So, that in itself should be, I think should be sort of celebrated. But where the pioneer area comes into it, I think we've consistently, push the envelope as far as coverage, to the point, like I said, with what the guys are using now and what we offer with our Tech Air 10 system, in having, coverage that even extends to the hips. And if I think about a recent instance where that was really important, was the Pecco Bagnaia crash in Catalonia last year. Before he got hit in the legs by another bike, he landed really, really heavy on his hip. But of course, the airbag had already deployed, so he didn't have to take that force directly.
Yeah, it's hard to think of a form of protection that's had that much impact, in motorcycling in general, apart from maybe the crash helmet, but or maybe to stretch you could say a back protector, but the airbag and what it's achieved, in the time that you could say in MotoGP recently there's been less high sides, certainly compared to other eras of the sport, but then, thanks to the progression of electronics and whatever else, I mean, we're not seeing so many of those types of crashes anymore, compared to, like I said, but, the airbag has, I think, been one of the major sort of breakthroughs in this sport.
Yeah, I think through the years, I wasn't so involved in the industry in the 90s at all or anything, but I'm led to believe that the implementation of back protectors as a really sort of universal key piece of protection in the 90s is very similar to how airbags are viewed now, and from the early days of the project where there was a something of a battle to convince people to use the technology and it can be beneficial, to now the feedback that we get from riders, and you see it during sessions when they crash, before they go back on track, they want to make sure that they've got a charged airbag for anytime they're on the bike. So now, in the way that you would feel naked without a back protector, these guys feel underprotected without a functioning airbag when they get on the bike.
I have a lame confession. When I did my first sort of track experience and I rode a KTM Super Duke in their launch, I think it was 2020, I was using a Tech Air system, and to have those blinky lights going off on my jacket as I rode out of pit lane felt super cool. I mean, that is like a mark of a MotoGP star, surely, having those kind of little little electrodes going off at you. But it's just become something that we're commonly associating with riders now. I mean, I was telling you only last year, when Pecco Bagnaia is sitting in a press conference or talking to media for the better part of 45 minutes, an hour, and he's kind of crossing his legs and just looking incredibly comfortable in a leather suit. I mean, the fact that whole system's inside it as well is really impressive stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the key parts of the airbag technology, because once you have the software, once you have everything functioning well, you've also got to make it comfortable and usable. We go to countries where it's a really high temperature, you're sweating a lot, and like you can't escape the fact that that's something that's not going to let a lot of air through. Where possible in the gaps between where the actual air goes, we can try and have like these little escape vents so at least air can escape the body. A lot of work has gone into making an airbag as ventilated as possible, but it's almost like an oxymoron to think about it. But that comes a lot from the feedback that we're able to get from the riders that use it. It's one thing to have something that works, but it's got to be usable and comfortable.
Chris, we've thrown enough hot air at you. So listen, thanks ever so much for talking to us about the Tech Air.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Guys, we've got some cool backing again from Fly Racing this year. The guys at Fly have some brilliant off-road riding gear, whether it's the Kinetic or the Evo DST, worn by some of the most recognisable names in Supercross, and featuring the innovative BOA ratchet for the perfect fit. Their Revel Roost Guard offers premium body protection and has been developed by motocross and supercross racers also. The compulsory shout out for the Formula helmet, if you're watching on the YouTube, then there's one right over my left shoulder just there, especially the S version as one of the most advanced and best performing lids on the market. As I mentioned, I've got one and it's the only helmet I will wear on the dirt. Okay, back to the Qatar talk, and point number 4. This is a bit of a two-parter and we sort of touched on it a bit. Neil, you were mentioning it earlier. Ducati seem to have some rear chatter problems, or even some technical glitches in the case of Marc Marquez. Will that be a big issue for the Grand Prix opener at Qatar? And secondly, how much hope can we actually, or rather KTM, how much can they pin on Brad Binder and Jack Miller after what we've seen in the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think, first of all, Marc Marquez's technical glitches, welcome to being a satellite team. These things happen, especially because you are running parts down to their, basically down to their life. So that you're running down to the end of their, you're extracting maximum mileage out of it. Especially during testing, you've got a bunch of bits, and it's usually sort of connectors and wires and all that sort of things which are not particularly important, but can just sort of like mess you up if they break. So I suspect that that's the sort of thing in a satellite team, because you can't keep on throwing sort of another couple of grand at a few more connectors, because they are very expensive connectors which they have to use because of the they're basically aerospace connectors which they use, for example. Just as an example, there's all these other parts which they're using, which get used to the absolute limit. In terms of Ducati chatter, I mean, that's why you go testing. chatter is, especially rear chatter, is a particularly difficult thing to diagnose because it could be coming in from anywhere. It can be coming from the engine brake, from the clutch. It can be coming from your chassis, from your suspension settings. Maybe they haven't got the cush drive set up properly. There's so many different things, different places that this could be coming from, that it's always going to be difficult to diagnose. And the other thing is, everyone's got chatter. Everyone's got chatter all of the time. So I think it's something that they can iron out, and it's not going to be a problem.
Enea Bastianini was complaining about chatter, and Jorge Martin as well. Martin was reasonably happy, but also confused as to the source of the problem. He had it more on one bike than the other, so he seemed to be hinting more towards a mechanical sort of problem rather than any kind of glitch in the electronics. But it does throw a little bit of a doubt over their possibilities for the Qatar GP. I mean, you imagine it's something they'll phase out or manage to solve in the coming weeks or the coming races, but it does throw a big question mark, I think, to a degree. And then of course the riders on the old machinery didn't have so much of that issue. Neil, coming up to you for the KTM side, just sort of hanging around the team a little bit in Qatar, it seemed like they were very happy. I mean, it was undoubtedly the best preseason that KTM have had in their 8th year in MotoGP. They were also under the lap record times, been both in Malaysia and Qatar, but then it just everybody else seems to have lifted the level, so they're kind of back in the same square where they're trying to chase Ducati and make inroads into their dominance, even though they have improved themselves.
Yeah, exactly. This is something that Pip Bauer was saying last week, I think it was, just after the KTM official launch, where he was saying, we're delighted with the progress we've made. It's just that the level in MotoGP currently is insane, and it is difficult to try and keep up. But they certainly have made a big step ahead. I liked how you asked Brad pretty much what you just said there, Ad, last night. The final night of testing, you said, has this been your best ever pre-season so far? And he said, well, last preseason I wanted to shoot myself in the face, and I don't want to do that now. So from that very short, concise answer, I think we could tell that things were, thumbs up basically in the orange camp. But yeah, it does look as though they've kind of addressed everything. They've not had to revolutionize the bike this winter. They've not had to make big changes. They had a very good base on which to work from the end of 2023, where of course they obviously brought the carbon fiber chassis for the final 7 races of the year, I think it was. And yeah, they've made changes to everything. They've addressed everything, but it's been little small steps, and it looks as though there's largely been positives. And I don't think we've seen the full. We certainly haven't seen the full hand, I don't think, of the KTM guys either, because. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Binder said that when he did his time attack yesterday, it wasn't quite the perfect moment, the best part of the day. So you certainly feel that had he timed that correctly, he could have been up there a bit further. And
he had 2 yellow flags
pretty much every day. That's what it was. Yeah, exactly. He had 2 yellow flags during his time attack, which obviously slowed him down somewhat, because I think there were crashes for maybe 2 of the Honda riders late on. So I don't think we saw his full hand yesterday. Do I think they're ahead of Ducati? No, but I think they're pretty close, and I think in Binder's hands, especially on a Sunday and on a Saturday now, of course, for the sprints as well. I do think we're looking at a guy that should be challenging for victories pretty regularly, pretty much like we saw in the tail end of last year. So yeah, I would say not perfect, certainly not Bagnaia levels of dominance or anywhere near that, but certainly in the region that they hope to be. And we know that Binder always saves something a little bit extra for the races. So I think they're looking pretty good.
Dave, Brad Binder finished 2nd and 5th in the last 2 Grand Prix in Qatar. The 5th place result, I think, was his tyre broke up after 10 laps or something like that. I mean, would you put like maybe a little bit of money as an outside podium bet this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Binder is definitely a good bet each way, especially because, as Neil was saying, he's a Sunday rider. He really does come into his own on a Sunday. But I think you can also see the state of where KTM are, because I remember I basically wrote KTM off at the beginning of last season and was made to look like an absolute idiot. Where, no change there, obviously. I was made to look stupid by the fact that Jack Miller had a really good start, and Brad Binder ended up having a really strong season. The bike is really good now. It is a solid base. If you look at what Pedro Acosta is doing, I mean, like, Pedro is a really special rider, obviously. But the fact that he can just jump on the bike and go is a sign that the bike itself is pretty good. It's pretty easy to adapt to. If you can contrast that with, Remy Gardner and Raul Fernandez when they first got on the bike, they just had an absolutely miserable time. That is very much not the case now. Pedro Acosta is in a completely different league to those two, but even then, the bike is good. So I think there are good things to come from KTM this year. I think they're going to be competitive.
Speaking of KTM, head to ktm.com to see the new rundown of the 2024 Dukes, especially the 1390 Super Duke R. The Austrians took the utterly mad and brilliant 1290 and made it even quicker and even madder. I watched the track review actually from 44 Teeth of the bike. Good entertainment as always by Ali and the guys at Almeria. And perhaps not the bike for pottering around places like Barcelona, in fact. But I'm curious to see what the 990 Duke is like for that. But the 1390 sounds deliciously joyful for any open road. More information, as always, at ktm.com. Lastly, guys, our final point or final narrative from the Qatar test. Who would be the top rider from the Japanese factories and brands at Lusail? It seemed that Yamaha were a bit of a fruity mess, especially when it came to electronic setup, even though they showed, again, an improvement in top speed. Johan Zarco, when I asked him whether he would be happy with something like a top 10 finish at the Grand Prix, he it was like I was offering him a win. I think at that stage, that would be a fantastic result. Luca Marini was looking a little jaded. Joan Mir was slightly erratic, but weirdly positive. And I was surprised with Alex Rins, actually, just how much he seemed to still be struggling with that leg. I mean, it must be coming up for 9 or 10 months since he broke it now. And of course, a couple of operations. And he said, actually, he had pain while he was at home after the Sepang test. He thought it might just be down to the cold conditions in his residence in Andorra, but it is slightly concerning that that injury is still affecting him.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Ad. I mean, if going back to your original question, if I had to pick one of the riders from the Japanese manufacturers to finish highest up in Qatar, I would definitely say Fabio Quartararo, because I think Yamaha look like they're in a better position compared to Honda. We know that one of their big weaknesses is the kind of the time attack to qualifying lap, which is pretty much what we saw last year. And I think in the first couple of races, at least, we're going to see Yamaha have very similar problems to 2023, where Quartararo isn't able to qualify in the first 2, maybe 3 rows, but actually has like decent rhythm, decent pace, and will be able to kind of launch mildly heroic comebacks through the field to finish, top 6 maybe. Whereas I think the Honda guys, what we saw basically from both Honda and Yamaha in this test was just a continuation of what we saw in Sepang. A couple of minor improvements here and there, but the issues which were plaguing both factories more or less remained kind of unchanged. And Honda suffered principally, I think, from a virus that was doing the rounds in the Repsol Honda garage through the test. I think Marini was pretty sick on Monday. Joan Mir was really sick on the Tuesday, vomited at one point, and had to sit most of the kind of running during the track time out. They did have I saw some aerodynamics updates which I think worked, which all the riders were saying were definitely quite a positive thing, but yeah, their big weakness is obviously traction, and that still remains. So it's going to take them some time to turn those deficits around completely, and I think the same could be said of Yamaha, but they're in a better position.
I think the one thing about the Yamaha and the difference with last year is, the bike is definitely faster. Last year, Quartararo was a bit of a sitting duck. Like he got stuck behind someone, and that was it. That was basically game over. This year, you feel that the Yamaha has a little bit more speed, a little bit more pace, and he'll be able to actually overtake. He won't necessarily end up being stuck behind bikes. I mean, if you get stuck behind a Ducati, you're stuck behind a Ducati because they've got 12 trillion horsepower, and that's just about your lot, really. However, Yamaha is going to be much more in contention. It's going to be in a much better situation. And yeah, I mean, Fabio Quartararo, I agree. I think Fabio is going to be the top Japanese rider, because I think he's also just, he's one of the best 2 or 3 riders in the world. So he's always going to be just outperform everyone. But the thing for me was like there was so much optimism that it sounded from, and this was the same in Japan. There was so much optimism from both Honda and Yamaha. There's been so many changes. There's so much going on that you feel that they feel like they are making progress. The trouble is they've got to catch up, and catching up when Ducati, Aprilia, KTM are at that kind of a high level, and they keep making progress as well. Catching up becomes really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to put into perspective what Dave was saying there, I think Quartararo was 3rd fastest when you looked at the top speed, the average top speeds on day 2, and Alex Rins was 5th. So that it's kind of unheard of, really, for Yamaha to be that high up. Obviously, they're still working on some issues with electronics as well, and it does sound as though the M1 is still a pretty violent, unruly bike, really kind of out of character from the historic M1 traits that we're used to, and it's been like that for a while now. But you do imagine that they will eventually get a handle on that and kind of make improvements with the electronics. I think Fabio said during the Sepang test that they're years behind their rivals in terms of electronics. But then the new people that they brought in from Ducati, especially new technical director Mark Bardolini, you imagine those are areas where they are going to make progress. And certainly Quartararo's comments on the first day in Qatar were just, we've got this new working method, we've got these new people, and things are so different now compared to last year, and that is giving it motivation. So I think Fabio's, his head's not going to bow this year, whereas this time a year ago, I think he was going into the season thinking maybe I can be a contender this year. I don't think he's under any illusions, and his ambitions are a lot more realistic, more in tune with what the Yamaha is capable of.
Yeah, it was also interesting to see that Yamaha were using that long exhaust quite a lot, which should give them a bit more torque, should tame the engine a little bit, instead of having the little short thing by the foot. Riders don't like it because they say they can't hear the engine, which to anyone who's ever stood anywhere near a MotoGP bike sounds completely insane, but that's another discussion altogether. The thing about top speeds, I am wary of top speeds because the bikes are getting faster and faster, and they are, they're braking later and later, and we're getting into the point where braking zones are where riders are starting to brake is starting to matter a lot. It's really starting to affect the different sort of top speeds which are recorded through the speed traps. So yeah, I think I'm starting to think that the top speeds that you're seeing on the timesheets have more to do with more to do with braking, and a little bit to do with acceleration than with actual outright top speed. I mean, if you really wanted to know the truth about the top speed, you'd have to look at the data, but no one's going to actually, that's the kind of data that no one is going to actually show you.
Yeah, I also think we have to give Yamaha some credit, after so many years of very, very small changes on the M1, or a largely kind of stagnant development, for them to suddenly be, ripping the drawing board to bits and trying to come up with some serious upgrades, then, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, they've had such a sort of stable project for so many years now. And but like Neil says, I think, Fabio is looking the strongest amongst the Japanese. Although I will throw it back in your face, Dave, after you pointed out on the group chat earlier that the top Japanese rider in Lusail is bound to be Taka Nakagami, just by virtue of the obvious. But yeah, never mind.
A flag next to his name.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, guys, that's almost it for today. We're nearly to Fantasy League time with some decent prizes on offer again for 2024 and a care package provided by the Alpinestars people. We're also giving away 2 paddock passes to our MotoGP Grand Prix of your choice if you sign up to our $10 Patreon channel for the year at a 10% discount. And we'll be posting the name of the lucky winner drawn out of the hat just from a few hundred across the Qatar Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time. We love feedback, so send us some comments on SoundCloud, through Apple, Twitter, or through Patreon. Next week, we hope to have a special interview with none other than Danny Pedrosa. You better tell Moto Matters contributor Zara Daniela to hold on to her virtual knickers for that one, Dave. And then we'll have another memorable guest lined up for our Qatar preview show. So a couple of big podcasts coming up. Any final words, boys? Any final comments?
None.
Okay.
I'm actually getting a one. I'm off to Michelin on Thursday for our Friday. They've invited a few journalists to show us around the factory to discuss things. I'm looking forward to that. I had some interesting conversations in Sepang about that, about the importance of data and the way they produce things. So I just want to see how they actually make their tires. I think Michelin were quite miffed by all the negative publicity they got about Jorge Martin's tire last year, and they want to prove that, look, these tires that roll out of these machines, they are absolute. They're as identical as they can make them, and the kind of difference that Martin is talking about can't have come from production. It must have come from something else. So yeah, looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, also the Moto2, Moto3 official test is next week in Jerez, which I'll be attending. So our Patreon supporters can look out for some reaction from that, and maybe some interviews that I managed to get. Obviously a big test because, after Valencia at the end of last year, it's Pirelli tire test, which is going to see some big changes, I feel, in Moto2 especially. So that should be exciting too.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what effect the Pirelli tires have on the MotoGP class. What happens when they start racing after Moto2 with all the Pirelli rubber on the track? I don't think we'll see it at Qatar because Qatar's weird in terms of the surface anyway. But when we get to like Jerez, maybe Portimao a little bit, how's it going to affect that? I think that's really, really interesting.
Also, listeners, don't forget to look out for World Superbike coverage from Steve. Thanks to Rental, Fly and KTM, and we'll be back next Wednesday.